This episode of the podcast is brought to you by New Bloom Labs.
New Bloom Labs recently announced the expansion of their standard potency panel that now reports 16 different cannabinoids. These new additions include CBD, VA, and both isomers of Delta 10 THC. These now come standard on every potency analysis that New Bloom Labs reports. Cannabis producers that are creating innovative products with multiple cannabinoids need the best, most comprehensive potency analysis there is. That's why New Bloom Labs always positions itself at the cutting edge of cannabis science. Family owned and operated, New Bloom Labs provides precise, accurate analysis and the best turnaround time in the industry. Give them a call today at 844-TEST-CBD or visit their website at newbloomlabs.com. Superior science, rapid results, New Bloom Labs.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our friends at Regrow, the premier cloud-based cannabis supply chain management system.
It's time to throw away those whiteboards, spreadsheets, and stop using email to manage your cultivation, distribution, and manufacturing processes. That's step one. Step two is to talk to the team at Regrow. Regrow is built to automate manual tasks, reduce costs, and avoid shortages by creating dynamic workflows that maximize yields and increase profitability for your cannabis business. Basically, what I'm saying is Regrow is the single pane of glass view into your entire supply chain. The cloud-based supply chain management system is available globally with native localization and foreign language support. If you have a vertically integrated and/or multi-state operation, Regrow will help you increase your revenue while keeping your entire operation fully compliant. Visit their website at regrow.io. That's regrow.io. Regrow, the premier cloud-based cannabis supply chain management system. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connects podcast. My guest today is Rosie Mattio, founder of MATTIO Communications. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest today, the queen of cannabis PR, Rosie Mattio, the founder of MATTIO Communications. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me today. I always blush a little bit when I hear, the cannabis queen, but it's fun,
Hey, just play on it. It's
That's right. That's right. I got to fix my crown. That's right.
It's a good title because really, if you look at your background and what you've done in the industry, you really did, spearhead ushering in this new cannabis age. And I know you garnered a lot of media exposure for your clients. And you actually published the first cannabis article, right? Was that within Oprah magazine?
Yeah. So we always say, and we're always very proud of this, that we were responsible for the first story written about cannabis in Vogue magazine. And just give you a quick story about that is just because my background was in food and technology PR. A lot of my media contacts were food editors and lifestyle editors. And I was very close with the lifestyle reporter at Oprah magazine. And when I got into the space in 2014, in 2016, I brought her out to visit Candescent to introduce her to what new cannabis looked like. And she loved it and started researching the space and wrote a story about cannabis. So that was pretty exciting.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it's so important, especially at that time, just to really legitimize, the plant and the efficacy and the industry. And it's like, hey, it's much more than just, what you kind of think stereotypically about the black market and that kind of shady dealings behind the scenes. It's an actual business and it should be treated that way. Right.
Yeah. And that's actually the approach that I took from the beginning. And it was just, I've always been like a professional publicist. So when I got into this space, I just treated it like any other CPG product I'd ever worked on in the past. And I don't know why I did that. It was just the way I looked at it when I was seeing what was happening in the space. And I was living in Seattle at the time and I saw moms like me and regular people just going into dispensaries and buying beautiful cannabis products, just like we would anything in our local Whole Foods. So for me, that's what it looked like. And that's how we approached it. And I think that's really been the reason why we've grown rapidly is we've always taken this mainstream approach to cannabis.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I want to talk and I want to kind of focus this episode around the theme of storytelling, right? Because ultimately that's what effective PR agencies do, right? They work with their client to identify announcements or exciting things happening with them or the industry, and then it's telling that story, right? Within different mediums, channels, and ways in which to deliver the content. And so, Rosie, your agency's done a great job of that, obviously. And so, tell me a little bit about first, like riding the wave of momentum, right? Like right now, cannabis is really kind of, it almost is being normalized. You're seeing all these different states adding them to their bills. But before this time, say, 2, 3 years, 4 years ago, when the momentum was really starting to pick up, how important was it to kind of ride that wave of momentum and really communicate the benefits and all the opportunities?
Yes, I always say, we've been a successful agency, because we're good at what we do, but also a lot of it was timing and momentum. So I think the fact that this was a new industry, when I started working it almost 6 years ago in 2014, really nobody was writing about cannabis like in a mainstream way, right? So part of it was being just really good timing, like being able to tell those first stories to media made it new, right? So like when I worked in food PR, was I was launching a new popcorn company. People had heard of popcorn before. So getting like a salty and sweet popcorn, maybe that was sometimes new, but it wasn't groundbreaking, right?
Right.
When you're joining a new industry, everything is new. So we started pitching these stories and mainstream media started to adopt it, right? And as it's grown in popularity and legalized in more states, we've been in a really good place at the right time to be able to tell these stories. So we have been riding that momentum. So part of it is that we're very good at what we do, but when you're dealing with a new industry that's, the trend is our friend. So there's always something new. There's a new state, there's a new product, there is a new use case, there's a new form factor. So there's always stories to be told when you're in this brand new space. So momentum has really been our friend. And it's been exciting to be able to tell first time stories. It's not that often you can tell a first time story. So being in PR or marketing in this industry is super exciting.
Yeah, no doubt. And you touched on some of these, but I'm super interested. So like you being at the forefront of really telling that story initially when no, mainstream media outlets or publications were covering these cannabis stories, like how has that narrative evolved? Like how have the angles evolved? Like I would imagine first it was like business operators, right? And the fact that this is legitimate, and now we're talking more about health and wellness, and like, so how has that evolved, that
Yeah,
story?
so it absolutely has. So, we talked about in the beginning about this Oprah story, but that was 2016. And we've been working in this space since 2014, right? So what was happening in those first 2 years, right? So it really was exactly what you're saying. It was the business stories, right? So actually my first story was actually more of like a mainstream, like fun. I worked on a cookbook, right? So that was different. But really the first stories we were placing were with Bloomberg, they were with Forbes, they were the business stories because this was a brand new industry. There were new operators, new states, and it was just this building of this cannabis industry, an actual industry, not just a fragmented or like or like the black market or any of that. This was like a brand new industry. So in
Right.
2015, we're telling
Like
that
the
story.
internet, right? Or like the tech boom in the early 2000s. Like this is something that we were at the forefront of. It's
Right.
new.
It
Yeah.
wasn't an industry. There were just operators. There was the illicit market. There were just these new. There were medical states, but this whole idea that we're moving towards adult use, where there was going to be like an industry, didn't exist. So and how it's changed. So when I pitched my first story to Bloomberg, right, the reporter there, she was actually, her name was Jenny Kaplan, and she was covering millennials, right? That was her beat. And that's who we went to because we saw some of the data, right? These were some of the early adopters of adult use were like millennials. So that was the reporter there, a millennial, not a cannabis reporter. Fast forward to 2021, there are, three people at Bloomberg who were like their mandate is cannabis, right? So like there was no cannabis beat reporter in 2014. We were finding these different reporters we thought the stories would resonate with. So that's been one way it's changed where there was like half a person's doing it at Bloomberg. Now there are three people covering it. Same thing in Business Insider. Like there was no cannabis report. And then Jeremy Burke, like he really, spearheaded that. And Malia Russell, who's now, she's actually back at Business Insider. They were the first people to cover it. But now Jeremy has his own beat, cannabis. So that's been a real change. So those first 2 years was really the business story. But even in the beginning, like we started working with Cannabis in 2015, 2016. So we started seeding those mainstream stories. Cannabis, luxury cannabis brand. first people to really do this high-end, gorgeous packaging, looking down the road to where we are now. We're in so many states, and there are these, high end, or, people who choose top shelf vodka are going to go for top shelf cannabis. We started telling that story 2015, 2016. So it took a long time to get these, lifestyle health reporters talking about cannabis. So that took 2 years of work to get that done. And then in 20, now you're seeing everybody, like you said, you're seeing fashion, you're seeing health and wellness talk about cannabis. So it has been a really big shift. Now, every single publication, like when we pitched Marie Claire 2015, they wouldn't touch it. They said, no way. Now they're covering it. So it's really, really been gratifying to see the shift where people are really adopting it on the business side, on the health and wellness side, and on a lifestyle angle.
Yeah, no, it's super fascinating, and it's exciting as well. And, my prediction would be kind of the next narrative that this will kind of transition or evolve into is going to be on the medicinal side, the pharmaceutical side. Like, and this, again, comes with federal, removing the Schedule I regulation and really kind of bringing down those barriers. But with all the minor cannabinoids in the plant, and we're learning what each one does, each compound, it's very fascinating in which it marries with our endocannabinoid system. So, really dialing that in will be a new narrative, I think, that will be super interesting in the scientific space.
Yeah, and that's why you hear people say we're still just in the first inning, right? We haven't even scratched the surface, like on what medical research can be with this plant. Like, we know ancillary data, because obviously we can't prove anything because FDA isn't, really, mandating cannabis yet. At some point they will, and then we'll really get that research and see all the ways this plant can be saving lives, improving lives. So that's really exciting. We're just telling a tiny bit of that story. It's going to be huge. So that's going to be really exciting to see.
Yeah, exactly. No doubt. I want to ask you this along the same lines with this momentum and legal cannabis being one of the fastest growing, or if the fastest growing industry. And all these states, again, kind of looking to adult use for cannabis. How has the narrative evolved on the market trends side, the Wall Street side?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, even over the past few weeks, I'll give an example. CNBC, right? When they're covering the space, which they're doing a lot more now, you're seeing, the CEOs of companies we work with, like Terracin and Curaleaf, and their chairman, you're seeing them on CNBC. And if even a few weeks ago, when they were talking about US MSOs, they were showing the Canadian tickers.
I was going to say that. Why do they keep giving the Canadian tickers love? All these MSOs are killing. TrueLeaf is killing it in Florida.
They're killing it, right? Yeah. And there was actually a lot on Twitter, and we're all active on Twitter. There was a lot of we're pushing CNBC, the whole industry being stop showing these Canadian names to the US story. And the reason they're doing it, obviously, because they're trading on the major US exchanges, right? And, and there was just even actually a belief that their market caps were higher, but the US market caps of some of these public companies are $8 billion. So that's moving. And we have started seeing that shift. I'm just using that as an example, where now they're starting to show the US MSO tickers. So we are starting to see that, it's being more adopted on Wall Street. And you're seeing, a lot of the companies, big public MSOs, raised a lot of equity in January. We're talking January right now, almost $1 billion. We work with Terracin. They just closed a $175 million deal. And we're seeing institutional investors as being those big buyers of it. So, while obviously cannabis is still, very heavily retail focused, you're starting to see the big institutions come into the place, and the narrative is starting to change. So also super exciting, this industry moving so fast. The meetings that we were having with our IR team, a year ago, you're not seeing the people who are coming into the space right now. Right. So that's been pretty cool to see also. Legitimacy.
Absolutely. The legitimacy, no doubt. And one thing I think that will, I don't predict that we go to straight legalization right away at the federal level. I think it's gonna, first start with some reform and policy in terms of, allowing for safe banking, removing that IRS provision 280E, which is insane. Right. But also the ability to allow these MSOs to list on NASDAQ, right? And in the major exchanges, because right now it's kind of like the best hidden secret. The people that are actively in it and on Twitter, like you and I and others that are just kind of following these pot stocks, there's a huge opportunity for others out there that are unaware, and they're just kind of focused on those Canadian stocks, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and there's nothing more fun when I see, some of, our Twitter fam, as I call them, like when you start seeing them, like they've been in so early. Can you imagine being like in the first inning of any industry, like what that's going to look like in 10 years? Like this is creating generational wealth. And these are stocks that are in the teens and the 20s, right? Think about like what Google is at now, right? Can you imagine if you had bought Google at $10?
Exactly.
What your portfolio would look like now? Like what a time that we can be part of generational wealth building. It is just so cool.
Yeah, I mean, Harvest Health is trading at like $3.60 or $4, and Arizona just legalized. They literally just started sales this week,
Right.
And what's going to happen with those neighboring states like New Mexico, where I grew up, and others? They're going to, of course, adopt this. They're going to transition over, and it's an exciting time. It really is. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about, storytelling from the perspective of creating an authentic brand in this industry, because obviously, and especially like outside of just the THC market, you've got the CBD market, which is completely flooded, right? With different companies and businesses that are just trying to make it, right? And some doing bad, acts and operating in a bad way due to the lack of federal regulation. And then you've got the good actors. So what can you do to differentiate yourself when it comes to, communications, marketing, etc.?
Yeah. So, just as from our company ethos, right? Like when we take on a client, especially as it relates to CBD, because as I said, there's so many players in the market. It really is understanding like what their story is, and then us helping them create like the story that's going to resonate with media. And I'll use an example of a company that's got great storytelling that makes our job very easy. But and there's a reason why we love working with them. We work with them for so long, and they actually participate in both the THC and CBD market, and that's Papa and Barkley.
They're great. I love Papa and Barkley. Yeah, love them.
So we could go out with Papa and Barkley saying, this is, they use whole plant, they're the whole plant process, and they have great like technology. It's like how they get their product out to market. So that we could say, Papa and Barkley is the best CBD, best THC in the market. It's a great wellness brand. Like that's what maybe somebody would say because they have a great process, right?
Right.
But because they do whole plant. But the reason why they're so interesting is they really have an amazing story. Like the Papa and Barkley founding story is a story about Adam Grossman, who is the founder and now executive chairman of the company. His father was dealing with debilitating back pain and was on hospice care. And they tried everything, every type of medicine, and he was in so much pain. And he started doing some research on that cannabis could be really helpful for him. Called one of his friends, his father's in Massachusetts, being like, "Hey, dude, what you got for me?" Right? And he took a crock pot and threw some cannabis in and some coconut oil, and he created the first batch of Papa and Barkley, and he used it on his father, who ended up, living, a couple more years, with a lot less pain, and he really saw the power of the plant, right? So when you have that founding story, right, a real personal connection, an origin story, right? That's a story we need to tell. Not that they use a whole plant infusion, right? Like that's great. And that is like why it's such an amazing quality product. But when you connect the person to the story, that creates like something that a journalist can really resonate to because it's really helped improve somebody's life. So that's a great story. And this happens a lot when a client onboards with us. They'll say like, "Hey, we've got the best product. We've got the best process." And we say to them, "As you should. Like we hope you have a quality product.
Right.
But how did this product come to be? What problem are you trying to solve? What are those really interesting parts of the story that we can tell?" We're working with a company out in Michigan called Highlight Farms, right? So they've got fantastic products on the market. They've got retail stores coming online. But the interesting story is that they're family founded, and the founder of it came from beverage distribution, right? So there's a lot about supply chain there. So we're going to understand like what it's like to run a family business, how they understand supply chain better than others because they've worked in a highly regulated industry. Like that's the story versus saying they've got great chocolate bars, right? And I'll just give one more example. If you think about TerraSen, a company, I brought them up a few times because we love them, longtime partners with them. their new CEO has been about a year now. Jason Ackerman came from Fresh Direct, right? So yes, TerrAscend is one of the most incredible multi-state operators, but their CEO came from another highly regulated industry, grocery in New York. And he always says, like, I could get a pint of ice cream across New York City during rush hour. Like, I can run a cannabis company because I've dealt with logistics, I've dealt with supply chain, I've dealt with a highly regulated industry. That's an amazing story. So what we try to do as an agency, which I think we do best, and this is like what I love about it, is finding those little tidbits, those little bits of the story that are really going to make it an interesting story versus saying we're the best company at doing this, because everybody's going to say that. So that's what we really do as PR professionals, is try to be as creative as possible to find those little angles that are going to resonate with media, and that's what works.
Yeah, no doubt. And in fact, the two that you mentioned, Poppin Barkley, Adam Grossman, and Guy Rocourt, as well as High Life Farms, Ben and Vinny, I think is who the family. Yeah, I had them both on thanks to y'all's recommendation. And you're exactly right. Like, having them on, that is exactly the story that they told. And of course, it's not made up and everything. It's just honing in on the origin story and kind of what the brand is all about, right?
Exactly. People want to resonate. They want to understand the story. The product might look beautiful, but I want to know how this came to market. How did this come to be? And we see this like in other industries too. Like, I have my very good friend, Elizabeth Stein. She owns Purely Elizabeth, and she was a holistic health counselor. And, nutrition and health was part of her life. And that's why she's one of the most successful granola brands. We try to tell that story. Woman founders. So it's all you're exactly right. Honing in on those stories is what makes a successful PR program.
Yeah, and you know what? I think there's also an added benefit to it, because we kind of touched on it earlier, that there's really a lack of peer review research studies and scientific findings of like really the medicinal efficacy and the science behind, the cannabinoids, right? But really putting these testimonials out there, like you mentioned, Adam Grossman's dad, right? And how the Poppin Barkley story came about. I just had recently, and I published this, I think 2 days ago, the episode with Brian Higuera. And he talks about his 8-month-year-old daughter, Sadie, and how she was having issues. And I think it was autoimmunity and chronic pain. And so they put her on all this medication, and it wasn't working. It was making her worse. And he actually had to beg the doctors to look to, cannabis, CBD, as an alternative. And they ended up giving her like a grain of rice sized, amount of CBD, and just helped her. And so those types of stories are just incredible. I mean, he teared up. It was so emotional, but to be able to effectively tell those stories is key, because it also has added value and benefit. You know what I mean? It educates people outside of what they're traditionally told or what they've heard.
And I also think about the personal stories. I just think about, cannabis as like a big business, right? Can we be a big business, but also a good business? And I think about this even personally. Like, when I got into this space, I had not been an habitual cannabis user. I used it in college. I wasn't living in legal states. And when I got in, I just thought it was a really interesting industry. I definitely saw the opportunity, like, once I got into it, like, this was going to be a huge industry. But once you start hearing the stories of how cannabis affects people's lives in a positive way, you can't help but become an advocate. So I think a lot of the work we do is, yes, of course, to build visibility for our clients and make sure that, people know about what they do and, their value proposition, but also we really feel so grateful that we've been able to educate media and thus consumers about the power of the plant and how it can help improve so many people's lives. So yes, it's an amazing business opportunity, but you can't help but become an advocate for the plant when you get to learn about it. And that's like been a really gratifying part of being in the industry.
Yeah, no, you're so right. Like I've been a user of 15 years, and I've just always known the efficacy to be, you're relaxed, you feel good, you're kind of, you're more self-reflective, more kind, more caring, things like that, right? On the THC side. But as I've gotten into the space now, and I've talked to such high caliber guests, again, your clientele, your client base at the Mattio side and others, it's been just remarkable to learn about how CBD has certain beneficial properties. And then also like the industrial hemp side of it. Like, wait, what? There's no waste to the plant at all.
Amazing.
Like, like, so like that to me, I never thought of that as like a college, guy after my athletic career smoking a bong. I never but it's like this plant is truly amazing. And every day I'm more and more fascinated with it. And that's the thing. The key is allowing the masses to understand the potential of this, because I really think it could be a game changer in a lot of ways, you know?
Absolutely. Like we said, we haven't even scratched the surface, right?
No, not at all. Like we're just right there, and that's why we're like where alcohol was at the end of prohibition, like literally kind of the same movement, you know. Um, it's just exciting. So it's kind of a good segue. I want to talk to you about the next green wave, right? This East Coast domino effect that we keep hearing about with New Jersey. And you mentioned TerrAscend. Obviously, they're a huge player in New Jersey, soon to be New York, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut. So, like, what can we expect from that East Coast domino effect, and how will it affect and impact the industry and the rest of the country?
Yeah, and actually, I just wrote an article about this in Rolling Stone. I'm part of their culture council about how East Coast is going to bring apart like the golden age of cannabis branding. And what do I mean by this? When people saw that actually headline, I got a lot of emails from like West Coast operators saying, "Are you crazy? All the brands come to the West Coast." And but if you actually read the article, I say that is the point. So East Coast has really benefited from the mainstreaming of cannabis on the West Coast. Over the past 5 years, we've seen, all these mainstream brands come into the space. For example, like I said, Cannabis and Pop and Barkley and Kana and Kaliva, all these companies have, and Cookies, they've all created these brands, right? And on the East Coast, we've been watching this happen. Like there's so much media around cannabis. It's just really gotten to be much more commonplace. And I also use this example all the time. When I moved out to Seattle in 2013 and started in 2014, my husband was working in finance. And when I started taking on my first cannabis clients, I thought it was really cool. And I was posting on Instagram and on Facebook, like, look at my cool new cannabis account. My husband at that point had said, "Hey, Rosie, like you're a mom of four, I work in finance. Maybe you don't want to be talking about this like illegal substance, like it's, a new pasta you're trying." And I was like, well, I am doing it, right?
Right,
Then
right.
when we moved back to the East Coast in 2017, when he was interviewing for jobs because he wanted to move back to be closer to our family at other, hedge funds, he was saying, "Hey, my wife is the smartest woman alive. She's got a cannabis company." So the perception over the years from West Coast to East Coast has changed. So I believe that as these East Coast brands come online, and these are huge markets, right? We know that New York has one of the biggest illicit markets in the world,
That's
right? People
yeah.
come to people's houses, with their little baggie. That because this whole mainstream of cannabis has happened on the West Coast, East Coast is going to adopt cannabis adult use so much quicker than it even was on the West Coast. That was like a medical market shifting to a rec market. This is a new market where we've been seeing this play out for the past 5 years. If you don't, everybody knows somebody who works at a cannabis company, who's invested in a cannabis company, who uses cannabis. So I believe East Coast is going to be massive. And we're really excited to be, we're a New York-based agency. We've got clients, we work at Curaleaf, we work at TerrAscend. They're all on the East Coast. And we're going to see this explosion. And it's just such an exciting time to be here.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And one thing that I want to follow up on is, like, you mentioned I guess, and I'm going to probably put it the wrong way. You articulate it very well, where you talked about kind of the perception of cannabis and the stigma attached to it, East Coast compared to West Coast, right? And obviously you've seen the West Coast be more open and to it, and the East Coast has kind of just been locked in in prohibition. But it seems like, to your point, but you also said that there's a lot of users, there's a lot of consumption in on the East Coast as well. So, like, how does that compare to the Midwest? Like, I would think that the Midwest would be way more conservative and against it than the East Coast would. So is there any comparable differences or similarities between the two?
Well, listen, you learn a lot in this industry. And what I learned recently is working with a lot of Michigan operators is that Michigan is like the third or fourth largest, or maybe fifth or whatever, like largest consumption state in the country, right?
Yeah,
So
crazy.
I mean, Midwest has a huge market, right? We're seeing like the Cookies brand, drop in Michigan with Gage, and we're seeing, grassroots, that acquisition of Curaleaf. These are huge. Midwest is a huge market, and I don't know, like, this is just me like thinking out loud, but if you think about what's happened with COVID, right? COVID has been this explosion of cannabis adoption, right? Like, it was deemed an essential service, just like your pharmacy or your grocery store. And like, why has it been such a big thing? Think about what's happening in COVID. we're stuck at home, right? We've got a lot of anxiety. People can't sleep. So cannabis is obviously a great antidote to that. So there's more exception of it. And I got to think, I lived in the Midwest for a while. My daughter was born in January, -15 degrees. When you're stuck at home in the middle of a cold winter, cannabis seems like a pretty great thing to be doing when you're stuck at home on those snow days. And maybe that's like not the right answer, but you know, it's a huge market. So we're really seeing from coast to coast, you know, cannabis adoption. If you've even seen Texas, right? Texas, one of the reddest states, most conservative states in the country, is adopting a cannabis program. Parallel has licensed down there. We're going to see like all these states. Think about Oklahoma.
I know.
That was the most surprising thing for me when I learned that Oklahoma has like so many dispensaries, a huge market. So we're seeing this adoption throughout the country. And even if you look at the most recent election, it was on 5 ballots, and in all 5 ballots where there was either a medical or adult use program, passed unanimously, right? With huge margins. So the US is going green.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it's almost like every day I look at Twitter and I'm following Marijuana Moment.
Yeah.
And I just see like every headline, it's like a new state's governor proposing, you know, legalization or reform policy, you know. It's really exciting. So I want to ask you kind of to wrap things up. I know that you have your own podcast, what is it? From pot to podcast.
Pot to popular. Yeah, that's right. I learned a lot. You are so natural at question asking, and I'm still very much a newbie. I'm like, you got this going on. I got to get some tips.
Well, that's a huge compliment coming from you. I appreciate it. I just tend to talk too much, and I guess I just kind of fell into this. But I've been impressed with the topics that you've covered and the guests that you've had on. So, like, talk to me about like your podcasting experience, what you're thinking about it. We can kind of jam on being hosts, you know?
Yeah. So, you know, I'm an intellectually curious person, and I always love to learn something new. So becoming a podcaster has definitely been a learning experience for me. And it's just so interesting because I've trained so many people to speak on podcasts, but when you have to do it yourself, it's a very, very different experience. But we launched it in July. And the whole premise behind it is sort of like the ethos of our company is this whole like mainstreaming of cannabis from pot to popular, is really talking about, you know, the media in the space, the marketers and the CEOs in the space to really understand how cannabis is becoming part of the mainstream conversation. So we've had, you know, obviously a lot of our clients. I'm so grateful that they agreed to be guests on it. And we talk about, you know, how the shift of all, you know, of cannabis into mainstream vernacular, and we tackle different subjects, and it's been really fun. And I couldn't believe we looked at the metrics. People are actually listening to it. So I got up my game a little bit, and but it's been really fun. And I'm also really gratified that we're going to be launching a second podcast in the next couple of weeks through the agency that's dealing with social equity and diversity and inclusion. So we're going to be elevating the voice of some of those that have been marginalized, you know, by cannabis over the past few years. Talk about the issues in cannabis. I'm really excited. We're still forming it right now, and I'm not going to be the host, which is exciting for me. Like, my name is on the door, so I do a lot of the talking, but I have a rock star team. And so I'm really excited that, you know, we've taken the initiative. You know, a big initiative for our agency this year is really dealing with, you know, diversity, making sure that we're elevating, just like we mainstream cannabis, we want to make sure that we're elevating the voices of those that might not have voices. So we're launching the second podcast named TBD, but I'll let you guys know when it launches, and we're really excited about that. And as you know, podcasting is just a great platform. We allow people to talk about what they're passionate about. So it's been really fun, and, you know, hopefully we'll continue to grow.
Yeah, I totally agree that you have a stellar team. I mean, they are all great to work with. And yeah, I mean, everything that y'all are doing is really, really important work. So we appreciate it in the industry for sure.
Yeah, and so one more point about our team. So before we started recording, you said I have little tan lines. I just got back from a vacation with my family. They're off from school. We went skiing, and I posted actually on my personal Instagram saying this was like the first vacation in 6 years where I've really been able to quote unquote check out. My version of checking out. I only took a couple calls and put my phone in my pocket while I was skiing with my kids. And it's because of my team, right? Like, you know, when you, as a business owner, you're always go, go, go. You're always on. And it's been great that, you know, we're 30 people strong, and I knew that everything was being taken care of at home so I could be a mom. And that was really, that's the most gratifying part, having a great team that you can rely on, you trust. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, I mean, human capital is the most important thing in business, I would say, first and foremost. You got to have the right team in place, right? And people that are all on the same page and following the same kind of mission. And the fact that y'all are adding that pillar of restorative justice, social equity, in your podcast is just amazing, and it's so important because while there's so much good happening, right, and we're all excited about the stocks and new businesses and new states coming online, we need to really remember and pay tribute to those people that were affected by prohibition and were penalized for cannabis related crimes.
Absolutely. We can't forget that, we're profiting and there are people that are still sitting behind bars while we're working in and day out and having these fun conversations. So it's definitely a big initiative for us.
Awesome. Yeah, well, can't wait till that podcast comes out. And Rosie, where can people find your podcast, you on social, and Mattio Communications?
Great. Yeah. So follow at Mattio Communications on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. We also have a Pot to Popular at Pot to Popular on Instagram. And you can follow me at Rosie Mattio on all the platforms. I'm pretty active on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm probably on LinkedIn a little too much. My clients are like, get to work. But I love connecting with everybody in the industry. So it's a fun part. But, thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.
Hey, well, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much, Rosie. And I want to run it back with you later on as things continue to evolve and more exciting news comes out.
Yeah, will you come on my podcast next?
I would love to. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
I'd love to hear about your experience and everyone you're talking to. So we'll set that up.
Awesome. It's done. I can't wait.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.